So question 8, and we're moving on to Stalin. So the question is, how did Stalin become leader of the USSR? So Lenin had died in 1924 after having a series of strokes, which at first put him in a wheelchair and eventually led to his death. The strokes were provoked by an assassination attempt on his life that happened just before he started the Red Terror. So at the time of his death, Trotsky was the most likely person to be his successor. Lenin had said he was the most capable in his testament, which he wrote before he died, about who should take over after he died. Stalin was just the general secretary. He was a grey blur. No one saw him as a real threat. Yet by 1927, Stalin was absolute leader of the USSR and the unquestioned ruler. So how did he do it? How did he become Lenin's successor? So what underpinned this was his cunning nature. He made a very positive image of himself for the public, but most importantly the party to see. So he convinced others not to release Lenin's testament. Now, that testament was written by Lenin before he died, and it criticised everybody in the Politburo at the top of the Communist Party. But overarchingly, it criticised most of all Stalin, who Lenin said was too rude and who could not be trusted. He would not be able to use his authority with sufficient caution. That's what it said. He was too rude, quote, "We will not be able to use his authority with sufficient caution," end quote. In contrast, Lenin wrote that Trotsky, out of all the potential candidates to take over from him, was most capable. That's a quote too, most capable. But because Lenin's testament criticised everyone a little bit, Stalin convinced them that it was in no one's interest to release it. And therefore the testament was buried away, and people didn't know that Stalin was Lenin's least favourite. Indeed, Stalin became the chief mourner at Lenin's funeral. He was one to lift the coffin, and he appeared in photos at the funeral, which he used later on, and he gave a speech at the funeral. Now, despite the Red Terror, or maybe because of it, Lenin was worshipped amongst the people as the first ever communist ruler in Russia, and it meant a lot to be the chief mourner at the funeral. It won Stalin a lot of respect. Stalin also promoted socialism in one country. So he said, rather than supporting countries that might want to turn communist abroad, they should just focus on Russia and helping Russia and Russia's people. This made Stalin seem particularly patriotic and nationalist. As well as making a positive image of himself, he also made really canny, cunning political alliances. So there's a lot of names in here. All those names are pretty much grade 7 and above. So it'll be pretty impressive if you learn them. Now, starting off, Lenin had employed Stalin as the general secretary. Now that might seem like a menial role, but it should be capitalised. General secretary meant Stalin was in charge of appointing people, and through those appointments he won people's loyalty, and that served him well after Lenin died. He also turned the left of the party on Trotsky. So he worked with Kamenev and Zinoviev to form a temporary alliance and then turned them against Trotsky. He then worked on the basis of playing his rivals off against each other and took a divide and rule approach. So he then turned the right of the party, Bukharin, Tomsky and Rykov, against the left of the party, Kamenev, Zinoviev and Trotsky. And this worked in his favour because eventually it was only Bukharin, Tomsky and Rykov left, and he could pick them off one by one. So through very careful political alliances, he destroyed his opposition. And the moderate grey blur of the party that no one thought was that important and could easily be forgotten outwitted his opponents, maybe because no one was really looking at what he was doing. Another way to look at this question is to look at Trotsky's weaknesses, because Trotsky was the greatest rival or the most likely successor of Lenin. So one weakness was he was Jewish, and there was many people who were prejudiced against Jews at the time. He was also a Menshevik before he was a Bolshevik, so people could question his loyalty. Mensheviks were just another party at the time before the revolution. He wasn't seen as a chief mourner at Lenin's funeral. Indeed, he wasn't even there. Because of Stalin's cunningness, Stalin had told Trotsky the wrong date, and Trotsky, not being very well at the time, didn't cotton on to this and never even attended Lenin's funeral. This lost him a lot of support, and he was seen as disrespectful. And he never really garnered that support back again, because Trotsky, in some ways, wasn't politically astute. He didn't go around canvassing opinion, so he was almost unwilling to canvass support because he saw it as beneath himself, and that didn't help his campaign. He supported the idea not of socialism in one country, but of permanent revolution, and believed he should, or Russia should, support other countries in becoming communist. This wasn't as popular an idea, and it was this idea that the right of the party criticised because it was believed by the left and they thought it wasn't patriotic enough. And these criticisms led Trotsky to resign from his post as Commissar of War. Now, this was a massive mistake because that post gave him a lot of power because he controlled the army in that post in many ways. And by giving it up, he had lost this very powerful tool. So here's a summary of how Stalin became Lenin's successor. As a revision card, it looks like this. And if you want to read more about it, it's on page 33 of your revision guide. Remember, once again, to get this into your head, you need to talk through the images in your annotations, to verbally say the essay almost. It's also helpful to try to copy it or say it again from memory and see how you do. But that is number 8, question number 8, finished.